So we're covering personnel security and physical protection for small businesses. Hopefully my slides work today. So Sarah Bren, we've been around for several years. We have focused quite heavily in the DoD world for a while. So overall, our goal is to help businesses around the world, around the country, develop solutions that make sense for them. Often, you can get $1 million idea or a $0 idea. It's not going to work within your environment. So we really strive to focus on creating a solution that works for you. So as we go through this brief, and it's the same that we've given on all of our briefings, I think this is our 4th or 5th one at this point, we can't give you specific tailored instructions for your environment. Each environment is unique. Every place we've been has been different. So there's no one-size-fits-all, which is unfortunate. There's going to be many, many different ways that this can be done. And again, it has to be done how it fits your environment. Our goal is just to hit these high-level concepts. The specific granular portions is going to be up to you. If you have questions or comments, please hit us up via the chat windows or via the question and answer portion, and we'll try to address everything as we go through it. The CMMC auditing standard is not available. A couple of months ago, they may have come out via a leak. I know the provisional assessors have gone through the training. I've not seen that yet. We're really looking forward to seeing all of that. So if somebody here has gone through that training, and has some insight, that'd be great. Please offer it up for the group. All right, personnel security. So what is personnel security? It is really the security of your personnel, for lack of a better term. It's understanding how your employees, contractors, third parties, anybody with access to your information or your information systems practices security in the environment and what threat and risk they present. Sometimes it's a very hard conversation to discuss. I've seen a lot recently about insider threat and fraud. So insider threat takes a lot of forms and fashions. This one we're particularly interested in their threat to CUI. If you are involved in classified work, the insider threat program came out. It's been 5 years now, I think. It's really big in the government. It's really big in the classified spectrum. They're sort of asking you to apply it within the unclassified world as it relates to CUI. So it says here where you start, who needs access, screening methods, and good things. Really, this has to start with HR. This has to start with answering those human resources questions, what you can and can't do, if there's limits already been established, or what you're comfortable doing as a company. You can't just start going out and implementing these types of controls. Humans, it's kind of a squishy topic. It's kind of a difficult topic to discuss. Everybody thinks everybody's great and there's never an issue. But the old standby is you can't betray somebody without any trust. In order to do the most damage, it requires that you have a lot of trust, and so personnel security really takes effect there. A couple of years ago, several years ago now, there was a series of stories that came out in the paper regarding secretary-treasurers of organizations like Little League, churches, Boy Scouts, or something like that, that were embezzling funds. Typically, they had some sort of issue, whether it be gambling or divorce or some other financial issue, and they borrowed money from the fund of this. And so they were trustworthy people, they were pillars of the community, they just got jammed up and had to borrow some money. And unfortunately, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars here. Here in Chesapeake, my son plays baseball. There's 1,000 kids in the baseball league, and each kid plays $100 a season. That's $100,000 per season. It's actually quite a bit of money that can be dealt with. So anytime there's an issue, somebody has some sort of issue that they can't share by definition, they tend to try to figure out a way out of it. And so they look to access things that they can dig themselves out of that hole. And something like controlled unclassified information or other proprietary or intellectual property is worth money to somebody or is worth some sort of benefit to somebody else. That's where all of CMMC came from. And so understanding the risks posed by allowing your personnel access to information is part of this whole process. So that's the background. And again, really, it starts with HR to have this conversation. But through all of it, it's understanding who needs access to controlled unclassified information in your organization, developing some sort of screening method, and we'll talk on those, and then those processes to protect systems. All right, so screening methods, my background, Alexi's background, most of our backgrounds here within Sarah Bren, we all came from the military and intelligence community. We've all gone through the clearance process. We've had to do the SF-86. All of ours got compromised several years ago, which was a lot of fun. So there's the background checks. Alexi says he's here now. Can you hear us, Alexi?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you.
Great, great. Apologize for my tardy.
All right. So background investigations are pretty cut and dry, whether it be through a national background or going through a third party. What's a reference check?
So many times you hear provide 3 valid references on an application, and sometimes they tell you not to use family, different things like that. But a reference check is literally whoever you listed as a reference. Depending on the position, you may want to actually call and have a conversation about who you're hiring. You may not have access to funds or resources to be able to pay for a criminal background check, or you may not have the type of data where you can get a single scope background investigation through the government. That may be expensive, but that's a free option for somebody within your organization to just pick up the phone and say, hey, I want to talk to you about such and such. They applied for a job here, and we just want to get your thoughts on topic A, topic B, topic C as it relates to some of the things that they may be doing.
So in this case, you mean calling previous employers?
Could be previous employers, could be previous acquaintances. Some companies go so far, at least from a background investigation with the government, they find people that are associated with you through whatever means possible. So it could be going to LinkedIn and seeing who else they're acquainted with and maybe contacting them to find out what they know. But definitely, if you have access to previous employers, it's definitely a free place to start, because it just requires you to pick up the phone and spend a little time, and it normally isn't too much in terms of cost from an overhead standpoint.
So I guess in all of this, and the 171, and I'm not sure about CMMC off the top of my head, but they're both a bit kind of vague. They just say do screening. So what's a company required to do, in your opinion?
On the list, I believe the CMMC clarification talks about the fact that you can decide to do basic interviews with the personnel that you may be employing prior to giving them access. It just needs to be an approach that you deem necessary, something that you can use to determine if you're hiring somebody that's going to be reliable, if they're hiring somebody that's going to be trustworthy. It may be best to outsource it if that's not something that you have within your wheelhouse to determine. Most companies that we deal with, at a minimum, they do a criminal background check. Some of them may do a drug test if they're going to be operating machinery, things like that. But these are just, examples of things. If you're dealing with financial data from a government contracting standpoint, it may be prudent to do a credit check to make sure that whoever is going to be taking over financial related things from a government standpoint, that they're not, somebody who can be easily compromised because they're knee deep in debt. But no exact requirement, completely organizationally defined.
Okay, awesome. So at the end of the day, you have to write down what you're going to do and then follow it, right?
Absolutely.
Perfect. All right. So protect systems during transfers or terminations. I've always been pretty clear on when you terminate somebody, what you got to do. And you've got all of them listed here. What about during transfers? That's always been a big confusion.
Well, during transfers, the big thing there is really an account review. If you have a trouble ticketing system, or if you have a help desk and somebody is transferring, you could, at least put in a ticket so that there can be some level of review, so that you can remove access that they no longer require, or maybe add access that they do require. But if they had access to CUI and they're moving to a job where they no longer need it anymore, then it should be removed through that transfer process. We know that you're going to remove it during a term. During my time in the military, when we would do account reviews, we would do them quarterly to make sure everything was good. But what we would find is that they're 3 jobs down the line in that quarter, and they still have all the permissions that were afforded to them 3 jobs ago, because account reviews often don't happen on transfers. So from a continuous monitoring standpoint, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a different webinar, you could catch it, but you want to catch those things on the front end, because if they don't need access, then their access should be revoked.
Absolutely. So part of it is really, you know, when they're being transferred, if they no longer require CUI, or maybe they'll, you know, maybe still require access to some CUI, but not that other CUI. I think that kind of goes back into, I'm not sure if we hit on it yet, but understanding where your CUI is. You know, if everything is on one server and everybody in the company has access to it, that's going to cause problems down the road, right?
Absolutely. And it kind of goes against access control. I know there was a different webinar that we did, but one of the requirements, you're supposed to limit access to only what's required to perform their job. And if you kind of just put a public drive out there and put all the data out there and give everybody permission to do everything, you're also violating one of the tenets of access control as well.
Now, one thing I don't see on this list so much, and it's kind of a hard one, is, you know, if you have a disgruntled employee, or perhaps you're doing layoffs or something, you know, you can potentially increase the monitoring of an account, or at least pay more attention from a monitoring standpoint. Is that true?
Absolutely. You know, one thing, I actually talked to a client, and during an assessment, we talked about contentious firings, you know, layoff situations like that. You also want to do a concerted effort with your IT during those types of tense firings. If somebody is putting in their 2 weeks notice or their 1 month notice, and it's an amicable split, you may not have to worry about those things, but you definitely want to have a heightened sense of monitoring, general alertness and awareness for somebody that you're going to be letting go. Maybe you need to speed your process up a little bit to be able to offset those things.
Okay. And one little note I came across recently is during the exit interview, you have to remind that employee that they have to keep that CUI or other non-public information they've been exposed to confidential. Have you seen that?
You know, actually, you know, leaving the government, one of the things we do is if you were read into a program during your outbrief, you have to be outbriefed and reminded of your non-disclosure agreements that you signed, and that it's binding for the rest of your life. So at no point are you, even if you go to another company, you're not allowed to talk about any of those things that you were dealing with. So the exit interviews, some of you may have been wondering, why is exit interview listed on here? But it's just for that reason. Sometimes people need to be reminded what you were associated, the information you were associated with here can't be discussed in any form, no matter where you go, and it's binding for the rest of your life.
Awesome. All right. So that's personal security, I think.
I would just like to mention one more thing.
Go ahead.
About that, the remote system wipe. That's listed there because, you know, during COVID, we all operate remotely for the most part. So there are different technologies out there, and there are different things that you can do to make sure that you have kind of containerized the data such that if you have to fire somebody and they're in Florida and you're in Northern Virginia, you can send out a command to potentially remotely wipe that data from their device, because quite frankly, you may never get that device back, especially send it back to you. They may give it to somebody. So investigating different remote system wipe technologies, maybe where there's pointers to the data on the local system, but it's actually stored in the cloud. Now you can remotely wipe that stuff as soon as it sees the internet, and you don't have to worry so much if they, you know, retain that equipment that they had access to.
Good point. Thanks, Alexi. All right, so physical protection. Cool, so we just lock doors and we're good, right?
You know, in some cases that may be sufficient, but in many cases it requires a little bit more thought in regards to what you actually need to protect. And of course, we're going to cover that under the where do you start. But physical protection activities, it could be your physical facility. It could be a locked container within a facility. It could be just tied to one controlled area, but you just have to make sure that whatever is there that has to be protected, the goal is to protect CUI, and in most cases, any network that CUI is connected to, because typically if you compromise one system on that network, you can pivot and compromise other ones. So it really just depends on what you have, and once we, you know, the reason it's important is obvious. a lot of people aren't aware. If I get my hands on your laptop, I can do some damage and potentially find my way into your network just by having one of your physical assets. So that's why physical protection is so important, because you get your hands on one thing, you can compromise it, and if I get it back on your network, now all of a sudden, you know, I can pivot, and we have some pretty good guys on our team here at Sarah Brin from a pen testing standpoint that'll tell you if they get their hands physically on one of your devices or one of your systems, they're probably going to find their way into your network. So this is a very, very short in requirement, but a very, very important requirement from a physical security standpoint.
All right, so where do we start?
So what do you need to protect? That's the big one. I think we talked about in access control, you can't protect what you don't know about. So the first thing you need to do is have an idea of not just what you have from a computer standpoint, from a laptop standpoint, but also what was in your facility, or even maybe what be on your person that you may have to carry with you every day. You have to determine all of what needs to be protected. And then you have to put some controls in place. And I have a question mark down there at the bottom for alternate work sites. So once we get there, you know, we'll talk a little bit more about it. But that's a very important thing that we're finding that during this COVID era, a lot of people didn't truly consider what it meant to protect themselves when they were working at alternate work sites or doing telework. So we're going to, you know, talk about how defense in depth is something that you can make sure you have in place to appropriately address it.
Now, one part of determining what needs to be protected is this, you know, CMMC 171 DFARS, is it just restricted to computers and CDs and things like that?
Oh, absolutely not. It could be your entire environment. You know, you have both digital and non-digital CUI. You know, you have your computers. You may have manufacturing equipment that you may have to protect. Could be storage lockers. Could be lots of different things. Your networking equipment. You know, your servers, your communications closets, the power that provides support to your infrastructure. You know, all of those things have to be protected, you know, from a CMMC standpoint.
Now, so, you know, I work in manufacturing. I maybe, you know, I'm here in Hampton Roads, and we work on a lot of Navy vessels, and I like to print out, you know, the big architectural drawings on the plotter. Can that be just left out?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
It can be left out in a controlled area, but there should be some positive control maintained over it, because maybe not everybody has access to the project that you're working on. So it should be used for what it's needed for, and then stored securely when it's not being used, to ensure that eyes that are not supposed to see it cannot see it.
Very good.
And that's what this next slide talks about, the various types of things that may need to be protected. You know, we have some clients at Sarah Brin where they may need to protect the entire facility, but we have some other clients, they just may need a controlled area protected because they only do CUI within one office of the building. So they put appropriate controls in place to make sure they lock down that room, that portion of the facility, but it may not be the entire facility. But under the entire facility, oftentimes people don't think about the communications closet. And when I say communications closet here, I'm talking, how does the internet actually enter your facility at this point? You want to make sure that you protect that as well, because if you're doing sensitive work that requires access to the internet, you probably want to protect your actual internet access so that you're not down and you can't perform the job because you've lost internet, or maybe you've lost power, things like that. So that's where that communications closet comes in at. It's actually a requirement to ensure that you're protecting the support infrastructure, a la power, a la telco, to actually give you access to the internet and give you access to power to keep your things running.
Cool. So I think we hit just about everything on here. All right, controls. I like controls. Secure controlled areas. Require physical access.
A lot of different ways to secure controlled areas. I've actually worked with a few companies, they use fingerprint scanners.
Sure.
But one thing that does not secure a controlled area is a fingerprint scanner on the front while everybody is at work on the back door.
Yeah,
you have to consider.
Yeah, I think you kind of cut out there, Alexi. So, you know, if they're, you know, you got biometric on the front, but they've propped open the side door for airflow. Is that cool?
I think my cutout just ended.
Okay.
You may have asked me a question, but I didn't hear it.
Yeah, so, you may have some really cool mechanisms on the front, like biometrics or badge readers or whatever. But if they're propping open the bay doors for airflow, is that okay?
Absolutely not acceptable. You have to secure and protect every aspect of your facility. If the entire facility is a controlled area and requires protection, you have to protect both the front doors and the back doors as well, because typically the people that you hire, if their job isn't security, then they're probably not going to do security. I know that, I don't know if you remember, but last year we went out on site to a facility, and we just decided, let's see if they're going to let us walk through and pick things up. And we just walked in the facility and we just grabbed things and kind of moved things from one place into the next. And nobody said a word. There may have been one employee who made a phone call to find out who we were. But typically when you hire people to do a job and it's not security, then it's not security. They're probably not going to pay as much attention, especially if they're an hourly worker. And I don't say that as a dig on an hourly worker, but oftentimes, their pay is based on them getting their job and the amount of time that they have. So they're going to focus on what the job is. And if somebody's roaming around because a bay door has been left open, you're probably going to have an unsecure facility.
So one of the things I like to hit on, and I'm sure you do too, is escorting visitors. And so first, what's a visitor, Alexi?
A visitor is anyone who does not have permanent authorization to the et cetera, on a regular basis.
Okay. So what about cleaning crews?
Cleaning crews could potentially be visitors, and cleaning crews could potentially not be visitors. As a general rule of thumb, I like to say that a cleaning crew is a visitor, but there have been some scenarios where a cleaning crew is actually authorized to have permanent access because they have been appropriately screened, and the owner of the facility may have went through the appropriate steps to vet those cleaning crews. So they've been authorized access so they can come in the evenings and actually go in and clean. But what you often do is you make sure that you restrict their access to specific areas. So rather than going into offices, trash cans may be left in the hallway, and then they grab those trash cans, they police common areas, but maybe not going into the pit or into the deep areas of the facility. But typically, they're not necessarily visitors. They're not necessarily authorized users, but they're also not necessarily visitors as well if those extra precautionary measures have been taken.
Okay. But let's assume they have not been authorized or vetted, and they should be visitors. What is the company's responsibility then?
The company now has the responsibility to take whoever it is, whether you hire somebody additionally, but you have to escort them everywhere they go. And the reason you have to follow them and escort them everywhere they go, because the control doesn't say escort visitors. It says escort and monitor visitors' activity. And you can't do that if they're down the hall and you're just sitting there because you know they're in the building and you're going to check on them every 5 minutes. You have to actually walk with them throughout the facility and never leave them alone because they are a visitor and their activity has to be monitored. Now, if you're sitting there maybe and you have cameras all throughout the facility and you can validate that there are no gaps in coverage and somebody is actually watching it while they're in the facility and not reviewing it after the fact, a la a recording, you may be able to get away with that, but typically you want to have eyes on them the whole time while they're in your facility.
Awesome. And so keeping logs of physical access. I'm a small business owner. We have keys. I come in and open the door in the morning. We have an alarm, so I turn that off when I get there, open the door, and then, the employees come and go. What do I need to do?
So it's a couple ways you can get at it. When it says logs of all physical activity or physical access, it means even the permanent employees, you have to have logs of their access as well. But before I get into it, though, let's just say why. If you ever had to conduct an investigation and you have no idea who's in the facility, it's going to make it very hard to conduct an investigation. So some people think I only have to keep physical audit logs of the visitor's activity, but you also want to keep that logging of permanent employees as well, because it allows you to go backwards to be able to support any potential investigation. But now jumping into, how you can do that, the easiest way, which is the most cumbersome in most cases, is to have a sign-in log, and everybody who enters the facility, you sign, you put a time that you came in, and you sign again when you leave. Those are logs of your physical access. Other easier ways, more cost prohibitive at times, is to install some type of vindicator system that may use badging or RFIDs so that it will track your physical activity. Yeah, but if, one less expensive way that would meet the mandate of the control, it may be hard to facilitate investigations, but you could also have cameras to be able to capture entryways and exitways, because you're now still logging physical activity. You may be prohibited in terms of how much storage you can have in that environment. And again, it may be more difficult to support an investigation because you have to backtrace and figure out, okay, what day did it happen? Let me go run the footage and see who was actually in the facility. But it will work as well. So sometimes you can get creative, but I would say that if you can afford it, the badging system is often the most easiest to deal with because you don't really have to think about it. As you badge into the facility, it knows you came in, and it will record that as an entry.
Very good, thanks. All right. So let's get to your favorite topic, alternate work sites and telework.
So this is a big one, and realistically, the only way you can deal with it is with a summation of other controls, which is why I mentioned the defense in depth concept previously. So the first thing is you want to definitely put some type of telework policy in place that can hit the big items. If people have to use CUI or modify CUI, or definitely if they have to have physical copies of either CUI or maybe digital media with CUI, you want to cover exactly how you want them to deal with those things. And don't assume that they're going to understand it on their own. Consider spelling it out. If you're telling them that they have to encrypt something, you might want to explain to them exactly what that means. If you tell them that they have to use appropriate physical safeguards, you don't want them to just assume that putting it in their pocket and walking out of the building with it and taking it on a long trip, that's going to be acceptable. You may want to spell those things out. But the 5 domains that are listed are all control families that have in some way some type of protective measure for CUI when it's outside of a controlled area or outside of your physical premise. So we're not talking about these today, but there are multiple things in all of them. The first one, I'll just briefly mention, awareness and training. Obviously, if you're doing a good cybersecurity awareness program and training program, you're going to talk to them about the dangers of operating outside of a controlled area. You're going to talk to them about things like shoulder surfing and how maybe working in a public place, maybe keeping their back to a wall instead of their back to a window, and not leaving their laptop alone when they go to the bathroom. Simple things like that. It may be if you have a thumb drive, don't leave those lying around. Make sure that your thumb drive has been encrypted by IT before you load CUI on it, before you hit the road for that next trip. Make sure you don't stick them in other people's systems without prior authorization. So again, there's multiple things that are listed, but it's not enough just to create those policies, to just create those procedures. That last line is probably the most important one on the system. So you're expecting them to fail.
Yes. So one thing that, and again, due to the nature of the environment we're in today, and hopefully things will change eventually, but businesses may not have been prepared for the number of remote workers they've had to use. So how do you feel about using personal computers to get work done?
Well, I don't feel good about personal computers at all. You just have to assume that somebody's personal computer is an untrusted device that's already been compromised. You have no idea what the security posture of their home system is. So in most cases, you kind of want to stay away from using them altogether. There are some scenarios where using a personal device can work, but that assumes that you've done some other things to ensure that personal computing environment is logically separated from corporate computing environment. Things, virtual desktop infrastructure, products such as Amazon Workspaces or Windows virtual desktops, where you're just seeing things on their computer screen, but no processing, no transmission, none of that stuff is actually happening on their local system. So there are some cases where it may be okay, but just as a general rule, It's an untrusted device. You don't manage the antivirus. You don't manage the anti-malware. You don't manage the DNS filtering. None of the security controls that you need to have in place to secure the environment as best possible typically are not in place on one's personal system.
Okay. Any other comments on TELEWORK?
Nope, that's it.
All right. So I think that's it. Let's see if we got anything on the other side.
I don't see any questions in the chat area.
All right. So very good. Well, thanks everybody for attending today. Alexi and I will hang out for a bit if there are any questions. If not, appreciate your time today and enjoy the rest of it. Thanks.
You know, while we're sitting and waiting for anybody to ask a particular question, standpoint of personal and physical security is that because CMMC is requiring you to have artifacts to prove that you're doing things, one thing that may be a good idea, even from a personnel security standpoint, is that you actually track who you've screened and who you haven't screened, and what method of screening you used, because those things can be used as evidence to show that you've actually screened someone.
And that's a great idea. One thing that just came to my mind is, you know, under insider threat training, under awareness and training is insider threat training. And for those that are still listening, you know, CDSC, the Center for Defense Security Excellence, which is part of the Defense Counterintelligence Security Agency, has insider threat training. You don't have to register. You can just, you know, I forget how long it takes, but all your users can go through that. And it's good to know, whether it be hostile workplace or insider or shootings or insider threat or fraud. Most of the insiders exhibit the same behaviors before the event takes place. So user, you know, again, from a safety and everything else factor, having that training is nothing but a good thing.
And for those interested, I just pasted a link to that site in the chat area. So it actually has general cyber awareness training as well as insider threat training, and amongst a variety of other types of trainings as well. I know many times small businesses don't always have someone on staff who can actually deliver this type of training, but so these resources are very, very good starting points if you're trying to stand up a program at a least cost.
Well, all right. I don't think we're getting any questions today, Alexi, so we'll go ahead and end it here. Again,
if you have any questions for us, our email is right there.
Feel free to reach out. Thanks, everybody. Bye.